It's me again, your friend, Rigatoni Jack. If you love real-life stories that range from hilarious mishaps to meaningful life lessons, you're in the right place. Story 1, the day I learned about ball shaving safety. Everything that happened that day started normally enough. I was visiting my mother in Hawaii, where she works as a flight attendant for some wealthy person. Her job keeps her there for weeks at a time, staying in fancy hotels. That morning, I went to breakfast with my mum and one of her work friends. I had a flight to catch later, so I left early to shower and pack while they finished their work conversation. "I'll call you when I'm ready," I told my mum before heading up to the room. Here's something you should know. My below regions had been itching lately. With a 5-hour flight to California ahead of me, I decided to do some manscaping in the shower. Not something I do all the time, but not totally weird either. Big mistake. After drying off, I noticed something alarming on the white hotel towel, a bright red spot. Looking down, I saw blood running down my leg. I'd nicked myself. No big deal, right? Just put some tissue on it, like a face cut. Wrong. So wrong. The bleeding wouldn't stop. I tried pressing toilet paper against it, but the blood just soaked through. Pinching the skin helped, but the moment I let go, more blood. Picture this, me standing naked in a hotel bathroom, one hand trying to get ready, the other desperately pinching myself to prevent bleeding everywhere. All while the clock ticked down to my departure time, I had to call my mum, while she was still at breakfast, to ask for band-aids. "Are you okay?" she asked, mother mode activated. "I'm fine," I insisted, directing her to check her toiletry bag. "I'll be ready in 10 minutes. Meanwhile, I'm still standing there, pinching myself like an idiot. The band-aids didn't work. The blood just soaked through them. That's when I had what I thought was a brilliant idea, super glue. The military invented it for wounds in Vietnam, right? So I called my mum again, asking if she had any or could get some from the front desk. Her concern grew. More questions followed. Finally, I had to explain. "Mum, sometimes a man needs to make certain grooming choices before a long flight. I was careless and now I'm bleeding. I need either superglue or more band-aids." My poor mother came back to the room, but she brought something better than superglue. She suggested using a maxi pad in my underwear, along with the band-aids. Yes, it felt like wearing a diaper in the front, but it worked. The bleeding finally slowed down after all that pinching, and the band-aid maxi pad combo contained what was left. I made it through airport security, walking carefully and checking regularly to make sure I wasn't leaving a trail of blood behind me. Later, when my dad picked me up, we went to dinner and had a good laugh about it, though I still kept checking just to be safe. So, here's to you, Mum. Thanks for not freaking out and for solving my ridiculous problem with practical wisdom. I love you, even if I never wanted to have that particular conversation with you. The lesson? Leave the ball shaving for when you're not rushing to catch a flight. And maybe invest in an electric trimmer. Story 2. I wasn't trying to spy on a former president, I swear. I'm just a wedding videographer who loves using his drone to capture those sweeping cinematic shots that make couples feel like their special day belongs in a Hollywood movie. The kind of shots where the camera soars over a gorgeous venue while the sunset paints everything in gold, and you can practically hear the wedding guests gasping when they see the final video. That morning had started perfectly, like actually perfectly. The kind of perfect that should have made me suspicious, because when does anything wedding related ever go that smoothly? I'd picked up my suit from the dry cleaners the day before. It was one of those suits that makes you feel like you could handle anything. Camera equipment, drunk groomsmen, emotional mothers-in-law, whatever. I'd eaten a real breakfast, drunk enough water to make my skin glow, and arrived at the venue with time to spare. The venue itself was ridiculous, one of those renovated inns that probably has its own Wikipedia page. You know those neighborhoods where every house looks like it belongs to someone who has a yacht named after their first yacht? Yeah, that kind. Ocean view, manicured everything. The whole scene screaming old money and new renovations. I'd done my usual walk around, scouting the best angles, planning my shots. The weather was showing off, just enough clouds to diffuse the sunlight perfectly. Just enough breeze to make the trees dance, but not enough to mess with my equipment. Drone flying weather, if there ever was such a thing. So I sent my little friend up into the sky, just a few hundred feet, nothing crazy. Got some absolutely gorgeous footage of the waves meeting the shoreline. The kind of shots that make you understand why people spend small fortunes to get married in places like this. And then they appeared. Here's the thing about Secret Service agents. They look exactly like Secret Service agents. Like they ordered their whole aesthetic from a catalogue called Government Agent Monthly. Two guys, probably in their mid-40s, wearing the kind of bland professional clothes that somehow still scream federal agent. They walked toward me with that particular purposeful walk that makes your stomach drop, even when you're innocent. I was busy pretending to be very focused on my regular camera work when one of them asked about the drone. And because I'm an idiot who loves talking about my gear, I started gushing about the perfect weather conditions and the amazing ocean shots I'd just captured. The badge flip happened in synchronized perfection, like they'd practiced it. "Me and my partner here are with the Secret Service," the first one said. "We need to have a word with you, please." You know that feeling when your brain just blue screens, like when someone asks you your name and you have to think about it for a second? Yeah, that. They led me to their vehicle, a grey Suburban that looked exactly like every government vehicle in every movie ever, and started questioning me. Who was I? Why was I here? What kind of drone? Who was getting married? Who was I working for? I answered everything while trying not to sound like I was about to throw up, which I absolutely was. My brain kept spinning out worst-case scenarios, missing the wedding, getting arrested, having to explain to my clients why their wedding video would be delayed due to my federal imprisonment. Then came the kicker. I'd been flying my drone about 100 yards from a former president's compound. Like an actual former president of the United States, who was currently in residence with their family. If I turned my drone camera 180 degrees, I might have captured the most expensive accidental footage of my career, and probably the last footage before being tackled by highly trained federal agents. They took my information, ID, business name, phone number, all while I nodded so hard I probably looked like one of those dashboard bobbleheads. And then, miracle of miracles, they started to relax, like actually relax. Suddenly we were talking about wedding costs and how one of them had only had 30 people at his wedding back in 2006. It was surreal. Having casual small talk with the same guys who, minutes earlier, I'd been convinced were about to throw me in a black site somewhere. They let me go with a warning about the no-fly zone, which extended 10 nautical miles, by the way, the kind of thing you really should check before sending your drone up into restricted airspace. I promised them, multiple times, that my drone wouldn't see the light of day anywhere near that location again. One of them actually cracked a smile at that. Later, when I told the bride and groom what happened, they laughed. Apparently, this was a regular occurrence in their fancy neighborhood. They told me I'd gotten the nice agents, which was both reassuring and terrifying. I did spot those same agents later standing on the grounds during the reception, just watching. It was probably just routine surveillance, but it felt like a reminder. Remember what we talked about, drone boy? The wedding turned out beautiful, even without any more aerial shots. The couple loved their video, and I learned a valuable lesson about thoroughly checking flight restrictions before sending my drone up anywhere near areas that might house former world leaders. So now I have a story that starts with one time I accidentally almost drone stalked a former president. It's not the kind of story you expect to get when you're just trying to film someone's special day, but hey, sometimes the best stories are the ones you never meant to star in. If you enjoy real-life storytelling, make sure to hit subscribe and that notification bell. I share new stories every single morning, and trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming up. Story 3. Looking back now, I can tell you the exact moment everything changed. It wasn't when I got my first car, or when I had my first kiss, or even when I moved into my first apartment. No, it was precisely at 11:42 p.m. on a warm spring evening, when I learned that true terror doesn't announce itself with dramatic music or ominous weather. It arrives with 6 legs and an unmistakable odor. Here's the thing about trauma. We all experience it differently. Some people survive wars, others battle disease, and then there are those of us who come face to face with nature's most horrifying creation while innocently watching Netflix. And maybe that sounds ridiculous to you. Maybe you're thinking this is the epitome of first world problems. But let me tell you, when death skitters across your neck at midnight, philosophy tends to take a backseat to pure, unadulterated panic. I was doing what any normal person does on a spring evening, multitasking between streaming shows and reading news articles on my dual monitors, living my best digital life. The windows were open because that's what you do in spring. You let in the gentle breeze and all its promises of renewal and rebirth. What I didn't account for was that sometimes renewal and rebirth come with unwanted house guests. The first sensation was subtle, just a whisper of movement across my skin. My hand moved automatically, swatting at what I assumed was a harmless fly. But here's where our story takes its dramatic turn. What I felt wasn't the familiar buzz of a housefly. No, this was something altogether different. Something that triggered every primitive survival instinct programmed into human DNA. And then came the smell. If you've never experienced this particular olfactory assault, consider yourself fortunate. It's the kind of odor that makes you question every life choice that led you to this moment. I lunged for the light switch, my vocal cords producing a sound that would have made any horror movie scream queen proud. My poor wife, peacefully sleeping moments before, was suddenly thrust into this waking nightmare alongside me. Let me tell you something about marriage. True love is when your spouse willingly examines the squashed remains of your midnight attacker and shares your trauma instead of filing for divorce on the spot. There's something uniquely bonding about mutual terror, about standing together in your living room at midnight, afraid to move, wondering if there are more of these creatures lurking in the shadows. I've washed my hands 6 times now. The smell lingers like a bad memory. My wife and I are huddled on the couch, Googling everything from pest control to the cost of moving to Antarctica. We're discussing the merits of various cleansing rituals, debating whether sage burning would be sufficient or if we need to go straight to exorcism. Some people say that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I say what doesn't kill you leaves you with an irrational fear of open windows and a newfound appreciation for hazmat suits. And maybe that's okay. Maybe sometimes the most profound moments of growth come from these small apocalypses, these tiny encounters with mortality that remind us just how fragile our sense of security really is. As I sit here, still occasionally dry heaving and contemplating the logistics of obtaining military-grade pesticides, I can't help but wonder, aren't we all just one unexpected encounter away from completely redefining our concept of trauma? And isn't there something beautifully human about finding solidarity in our shared disgust? The answer, like the location of this creature's extended family, remains terrifyingly uncertain. Story 4. Here's what they don't teach you in medical school. How to be a patient, how to acknowledge that the body you're learning to heal might sometimes be your own, how to admit that even with all this knowledge crammed into your head about sinuses and air pressure and eustachian tubes, you might still make the worst possible decision. Day 1. The pain starts as a whisper. My sinuses are staging a revolt, and I'm their unwilling host. Every breath feels like negotiating with terrorists who've taken up residence in my nasal passages. I should know better. I'm studying medicine, for crying out loud. But tomorrow's flight ticket sits in my inbox like a ticking time bomb, and my bank account can't handle the explosion of a rebooking fee. In the airport, I'm that person, the one everyone edges away from, shooting concerned glances as I unleash another symphony of sneezes. I want to tell them I'm usually more composed than this, that I'm actually learning to heal people, not infect them. But instead, I just clutch my boarding pass and pretend I don't notice their subtle shifts away from me. The ascent isn't terrible, it's the descent that becomes my undoing. Have you ever felt pain so intense it becomes a colour? Mine is white hot, radiating through my right ear like lightning seeking ground. Bob Marley becomes my lifeline. Don't worry about a thing, 'cause every little thing gonna be alright. But Bob, I think you might be wrong about this one. Day 2. Sound starts disappearing like someone's slowly turning down the volume of the world. At first, it's subtle, words getting fuzzy around the edges, conversations becoming underwater murmurs. I perfect the art of the nod and smile, becoming a master of fake comprehension. In my head, I diagnose myself. Temporary baro trauma. Nothing sleep won't fix. Turn it off and on again, right? Wrong? Day 3. Morning arrives with silence as its companion. My right ear has gone from muffled to mute, and pain has moved back in like an unwanted tenant. The ER doctor's face tells me everything before her words do, internal bleeding in the ears, eardrum hanging by a thread. The irony isn't lost on me, a medical student who couldn't recognize when her own body was screaming for help. Now I'm here, horizontal and slightly high on pain meds, wondering if this is what they mean by learning things the hard way. The doctors speak in cautious terms about recovery, about percentages and possibilities. I understand every medical term they use and somehow that makes it worse. Lesson learned. Never fly with sinusitis. The cost of a rebooked flight is nothing compared to the price of silence. P.S. To everyone considering Afrin as their saviour, yes, it works wonders for nasal congestion, but use it sparingly. Like that friend who's great in small doses, but becomes toxic if you hang out too much. Afrin can turn on you, leaving you more congested than before. Trust me, I'm almost a doctor, and definitely a cautionary tale. In the end, it turns out some of the most important medical lessons don't come from textbooks. They come from being the patient, from making the mistakes, from learning that sometimes the hardest person to heal is yourself. Tell your story in the comments if you've ever experienced something similar. Story 5. Here's the thing about being a twin. Most people don't get it. They think it's all matching outfits and twin telepathy, but it's so much more complicated than that. That's why when I met Sarah over winter break, my junior year of college, it felt like the universe was finally throwing me a bone. Because Sarah, she got it. She was a twin too. I'm Jake, by the way. 21, sporting perpetual bedhead. And yes, I have an identical twin brother. When I stayed in our college town over Christmas break for my internship, I wasn't exactly expecting to meet someone special. But there she was, visiting her family, and we just clicked. We spent an amazing week together before she had to head back to her school across the country. 2,000 miles might as well have been 2 million, but we stayed connected. Constant texts, Snapchats, FaceTime calls that went on for hours. I started falling hard. Then came the Valentine's Day plan. Sarah's twin sister Emma called me with this whole elaborate surprise visit scheme. She'll absolutely flip, Emma insisted. And honestly, I was all in. Booked the flight, rented a car for the 2-hour drive from the airport, picked up flowers, the whole romantic comedy package. But you know how in movies, there's always that moment where everything goes wrong? Yeah, that happened. I showed up at Sarah's sorority house armed with flowers and optimism. What I found instead was, well, let's just say Sarah had company. The kind of company that makes you want to melt into the floor and never resurface. We never said we were exclusive, she told me afterward, chasing me to my car. Somehow, and I'm still not sure how, she convinced me to wait in her room while she went to class. There I sat, surrounded by fairy lights and Polaroid photos, feeling like the world's biggest fool. That's when Emma showed up. She was horrified when I told her what happened, and we ended up talking for hours. It was nice, actually, comfortable, until things took a very unexpected turn that I'm pretty sure violated several sections of the best friend code, twin code, and probably a few other codes I didn't even know existed. Sarah came back early from class to find us in a rather compromising situation. Let's just say my brilliant comeback of, well, we weren't exclusive, didn't exactly help matters. The aftermath? Total chaos. Tears, shouting, a hasty retreat to my rental car, and the sinking realization that I'd just become the star of my own Jerry Springer episode. Looking back now, I'm not proud of how things went down. Being hurt doesn't justify hurting others back. I learned that the hard way. But I also learned something about myself. Sometimes the person you think is perfect for you turns out to be all wrong. And sometimes the perfect moment turns into a perfect disaster. And as for the twin thing, well, let's just say it's even more complicated than I thought. P.S. To all the internet strangers sending angry messages, I know it sounds unbelievable. Trust me, I lived it. And I still barely believe it myself. But this is my story, as messy and imperfect as it is. Story 6. Okay, so before I tell you this completely ridiculous story about how I almost lost my bird forever, I should introduce the cast of characters in this disaster. First, there's me, the certified idiot who thought it was cool to take a bird outside. Then there's my 3 brothers. We've got brother 1, who actually loves my bird maybe more than I do. There's brother 2, the voice of reason I should have listened to. And brother 3, the quiet, supportive one. And the star of our show, Jimmy, my green parakeet with a red beak who apparently thinks he's an escape artist. Also showing up in this disaster are 2 neighbours who started this whole thing by getting locked out. Some random steel mill worker and a guy in a wheelchair who was way cooler about this whole thing than he needed to be. So here's what happened. Not today, but yesterday morning, because apparently that's important to mention. Picture this. Neighbor 1 shows up at our door like, yo. Neighbor 2 is locked in his house, which honestly has nothing to do with the rest of this story, except that it's the reason I ended up outside with Jimmy in the first place. Because apparently I have the decision-making skills of a potato. So my brothers are trying to help with this whole locked neighbor situation. And I'm supposed to call the landlord. Simple task, right? But no. I had to walk past Jimmy's cage on my way out. And my brain goes, you know what would make this better? A bird on my shoulder. Spoiler alert, it did not make anything better. Brother 1 literally tells me, take him back. He's gonna fly away again. But me, in my infinite wisdom, I'm like, nah, he's a good boy. Narrator, he was in fact not a good boy, because what do I do next? I see this bucket of water and think, you know what would really prove my point? Pouring water while a bird is on my shoulder. The water goes sploosh, Jimmy goes yeet. My brothers and I go, ah, and thus begins the great Jimmy hunt of 2024. We spent the next 24 hours doing what can only be described as the world's worst game of Marco Polo. We'd hear Jimmy, we'd climb something, Jimmy would fly away, repeat approximately 47 times. The weather was garbage, rain, wind, cold, perfect flying conditions. If you're trying to lose a bird forever. Meanwhile, my brain is going, hey, remember how this is completely your fault? Let's think about that all night long. Brother 1 is crying. I'm not sleeping, everyone's miserable, but they're being super nice about it, which honestly makes it worse. But wait, there's more. The next day, Brother 2 and I end up at this steel mill because apparently that's where birds go when they run away from home. We find this guy in a wheelchair who lets us into his yard. Shout out to wheelchair guy, you're the real MVP. And finally, we spot Jimmy. Now picture me climbing this absolutely massive tree with a carrot in my hoodie pocket, because apparently this is my life now. And get this, my brilliant plan is to eat the carrot myself. Why? Because nothing says come back home like watching someone else eat your food. But you know what? It worked. Jimmy's like, oh snap, that's my carrot, and inches over. I grab him, getting my hands shredded in the process because apparently he took offense to that. Stuff him in my hoodie and start crying like a baby. Happy ending. Jimmy's home. Unhappy ending. I will never live this down. Moral of the story, when your brother tells you not to take your bird outside, listen to your brother. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk about how not to be a complete idiot with your pet bird. Let me know in the comments, what would you have done in this situation? Story 7. Let me tell you about the day everything went wrong in the Australian outback. And when I say wrong, I mean spectacularly, ridiculously wrong in ways that would make even the most hardened outback veteran cringe. I'm a geologist working at a mining camp in Western Australia, which is basically the definition of middle of nowhere. Picture this, red earth stretching to the horizon, temperatures that make you feel like you're living in a hairdryer, and more flies than you'd see at a garbage dump convention. This is my life 8 days at a time, examining rocks from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. before flying back to civilization for a brief respite. Now, about that particular day, it started at 5 a.m., as all my workdays do, with me stumbling around like a zombie who'd had too much coffee. The temperature was already climbing toward 40 degrees Celsius. That's 104 degrees Fahrenheit for you non-metric folks. And my brain was foggy from 7 straight days of 12-hour shifts. Here's something they don't tell you about working in the outback. Hydration is everything. We have this saying here, if you're feeling thirsty, it's already too late. So I drink water like it's my job, sometimes up to 10 litres a day. And what goes in must come out, if you catch my meaning. That morning, I made my sleepy way to the bathroom, deciding to sit rather than stand because aiming requires more coordination than I possessed at that hour. This is where everything started going downhill. In my half-awake state, I managed to bump against the cold porcelain bowl, an experience I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. It jolted me awake faster than any espresso shot could have. The real adventure began during my 45-minute drive to the drill site. Something felt off. You know that feeling when something's not quite right, but you can't put your finger on it? That was me, except the feeling was very specifically in my shorts. I tried to ignore it, focus on my morning coffee and podcast. but the discomfort persisted like an itch you can't scratch in public. By 11 a.m., working under the merciless sun with flies buzzing around like tiny helicopters, I couldn't take it anymore. I found what passes for privacy in an open mining pit behind a utility vehicle and investigated the situation. What I discovered would make any health and safety officer faint on the spot. Remember those flies I mentioned? Well, one particularly unfortunate insect had managed to get itself into a rather compromising position during my earlier bathroom check. The poor thing had met its end in what has to be one of the most unusual ways possible in the animal kingdom. In my panic to remedy the situation, I made the rookie mistake of using my dusty iron ore covered hands and some bottled water to clean up. Picture this. There I am, pants around my ankles, water bottle in one hand when a water truck drives by. At this point, I'd lost all sense of dignity. When you're dealing with an angry, swollen situation caused by an expired insect, pride takes a back seat. The rest of my day was spent in varying degrees of discomfort, made worse by my impromptu cleaning attempt with less than sterile mining hands. It turns out that adding iron ore dust to an already sensitive situation is not recommended by any medical professional anywhere. Let this be a lesson to everyone working in the Australian outback. Always check for unwanted visitors and maybe pack some antiseptic wipes. As for the fly, well, I have to admire its determination, even if its choice of final resting place left something to be desired. And that, my friends, is the story of how a single fly turned my ordinary workday into an episode of What Not to Do in the Outback. At least it makes for a good story at parties. Well, certain types of parties anyway. The next story is absolutely wild. Stick around, you won't believe how it ends. Story 8. You know how sometimes the universe conspires to turn an ordinary screw-up into an epic disaster? Well, that's exactly what happened at my sister's wedding reception last week. Picture this, me standing there with my shiny DJI drone, ready to capture some seriously epic aerial footage. The wind was whipping around like nature's own mosh pit, but did that stop me? Of course not, because I'm an idiot. I had this brilliant idea for a shot, starting close, then pull back dramatically to reveal the whole party scene. Real cinematic stuff, right? That's when Mother Nature decided to play her cruel joke. A massive gust of wind caught my drone and sent it rocketing backward faster than my brain could process what was happening. Now, these DJI drones are supposed to be smart. They've got all these fancy sensors to avoid obstacles. But watching what happened next was like seeing a drunk robot trying to navigate a maze. The drone ping-ponged through the tree branches, breaking free from one only to crash straight into another. The entire wedding reception turned into an impromptu audience, collectively gasping and groaning with each near escape. Then it happened. The drone flipped sideways like a dying fish and sploosh. Oh yeah. Did I mention there was a river below those trees? Because there was definitely a river below those trees. Here's where things got interesting. You know how people love to give obviously terrible advice? Well, several helpful souls suggested I should jump in and retrieve my drowned drone. Because apparently this wedding needed more entertainment. After a few minutes of what I generously call thinking, I made a decision that would live in family legend forever. Right there, in front of God and everybody, I started stripping down to my underwear. The crowd went silent. Nobody had even started drinking yet, but here I was, putting on a show. Just as I was about to make my grand aquatic entrance, a voice rang out across the lawn. "Sir, do not jump in that water. We have someone coming to help retrieve your drone." Turns out the park staff had been watching my little strip show with growing alarm. The river, as they so kindly informed my nearly naked self, was strictly off limits. Fantastic timing, really. So, there I stood, practically nude, while the entire reception stared at me in stunned silence. That's when my grandmother, bless her mischievous heart, broke the tension by cackling and demanding photos. Like sharks smelling blood in the water, suddenly everyone wanted their picture taken with the half-naked drone guy. The emotions swirling through me were like a smoothie made of shame, embarrassment, and utter despair. But what could I do? I smiled for those photos, shivering and vulnerable, while my dignity evaporated like morning dew. The final insult came when the park staff finally showed up with their rescue equipment. A tiny fishing net that couldn't have been more than 4 feet long. The river was 12 feet deep. you do the math. And that's how both my drone and my dignity found their final resting place at the bottom of that river. At least I gave everyone something to talk about besides the chicken or fish dinner options. Some say on quiet nights you can still hear the ghost of my drone beeping sadly beneath those dark waters. Or maybe that's just the sound of my remaining self-respect drowning. Story 9. Here's what I've learned about meningitis. It doesn't care about your carefully constructed plans or your resistance to asking for help, or even your encyclopedic knowledge of Monty Python quotes. Meningitis, like the universe itself, operates with a magnificent and terrible indifference to human desires. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The thing about living at sea level is that you never really think about oxygen until you don't have enough of it. That's the way privilege works, isn't it? You don't notice what you have until it's gone. In Denver, Colorado, exactly 5,280 feet above sea level, oxygen becomes a precious commodity that your flatlander lungs suddenly have to negotiate with. I was there for work, which is the kind of mundane detail that always precedes extraordinary events. Nobody ever says, I was climbing Mount Kilimanjaro when nothing particularly interesting happened. No. The most dramatic moments of our lives often begin with I was at work, or I was at the grocery store, or in my case, I was in Denver learning about freight logistics. They warned me about altitude sickness, of course. That's the first thing everyone tells you about Denver, right after they mention the legal marijuana and before they talk about the ski slopes. Altitude sickness happens to everyone, they say, as if this mutual suffering somehow makes it better. As if shared misery is less miserable. So when I started feeling like my brain was trying to escape through my eye sockets on day 2, I did what any reasonable person would do. I ignored it completely. This, as it turns out, was what philosophers might call a really bad decision. There's something particularly surreal about waking up in the middle of the night in the hotel room when your world has decided to start spinning like a cosmic top. The ceiling becomes the floor, becomes the wall, becomes the ceiling again in an endless loop that defies both physics and common sense. The lights, even the dim, barely there lights that hotels never quite managed to eliminate, felt like tiny daggers of pure hatred being driven directly into my cerebral cortex. Now here's where I should have called 911. That would have been the logical choice, the responsible choice, the choice that any reasonable adult would make. But here's the thing about being human. We are remarkably good at making terrible decisions, especially when our brains are quite literally inflamed. Instead of calling for help like a normal person, I reached for my phone and Googled after hours urgent care. Because apparently I thought my condition, which I would later learn was actual literal meningitis, was on par with a sprained ankle or a bad case of sniffles. The universe, in its infinite capacity for irony, actually provided an answer. After hours urgent care. Yes, that's really how they spell it. The English major in me died a little just typing that. What followed was a series of events that would be comical if they weren't potentially fatal. I drove myself across Denver, a decision that retrospectively fills me with the kind of horror usually reserved for realizing you've just sent a screenshot of your crush's Instagram profile to your crush. The urgent care center was on the second floor, which felt like the universe's personal joke at my expense. And then there was the elevator incident. Have you ever leaned against what you thought was a wall, only to have it disappear behind you? That's what happened to me, except the wall was an elevator door, and I was too delirious to even be properly surprised by this development. The medical staff appeared in full protective gear, looking less like healthcare providers and more like extras from a post-apocalyptic film. They kept asking who drove me there, refusing to believe that I had managed this feat myself. In retrospect, their disbelief was probably warranted. If this story made you laugh, smash that like button. Story 10. Okay, so here's the thing. I never thought I'd tell anyone this story except my family. But after reading some wild stories online, I realized mine isn't the craziest thing that's ever happened. Still pretty intense though. Picture this. It's February 2019 and I've just come into some money. Being the totally awesome grandkid that I am, I decided to take my grandmother on vacation to Tennessee. She's basically raised me single-handedly and works harder than anyone I know, so she totally deserved it. It was amazing, by the way, like core memory level amazing. But here's where things get complicated. You should probably know that I have OCD, and not the kind where you just like things organized. We're talking full-on insects are my worst nightmare kind of OCD. So when I got back home and saw these tiny brown fruit flies zipping past my computer screen while I was trying to game, total panic mode. I traced it back to half a lemon I'd accidentally left in my room before the trip. No big deal, right? I suited up like I was handling radioactive waste, 3 pairs of gloves and clothes I later threw in the trash, and got rid of that citrus menace. Problem solved, or not. The fruit flies disappeared for a few days, then came back with a vengeance. Like, seriously? I went full detective mode, searching every inch of my room. I'm talking furniture moved, vacuum running for hours, scrubbing surfaces until my arms ached. I even banned all food and drinks from my room like some sort of anti-snack dictator. But these fruit flies? They were multiplying faster than gossip in a high school cafeteria. The breaking point came when one of them landed on my arm while I was in bed. You know that moment in horror movies when everything goes silent right before chaos breaks loose? Yeah, it was like that. I completely lost it. There were fruit flies everywhere. So I did what any totally rational person would do. I declared my room a quarantine zone. We're talking vinegar traps everywhere, vents sealed with paper and tape, towels shoved under the door. I moved into our spare bedroom and basically became the neighborhood watch for escaped fruit flies. The worst part? They still got out. I felt like I was living in a nightmare where nowhere was safe. Every time I saw a fruit fly, boom, instant panic attack. Finally, my family had enough of my fruit fly drama and decided to investigate my room themselves. And wow, did they find something? Here's the part that's hard to write about. In my closet, the closet I never used because all my clothes were in the spare room, they found a bag, but not just any bag. This bag was, well, it was full of vomit. My vomit. See, I've been dealing with bulimia since I was 14. Usually I'd purge in the bathroom, but one time when we had company over, I used a bag and hid it in my closet, and then I forgot about it. For 6 years, my eating disorder had been this secret thing between me and various toilets. But now it had turned my room into a fruit fly paradise. 6 months of panic attacks, sleepless nights, and feeling like I was losing my mind, all because of this one horrible memento of my illness. The guilt hit me like a ton of bricks, or maybe more like a swarm of fruit flies. Sorry, too soon. But you know what? This was my wake-up call. Sometimes the universe has a really weird way of telling you it's time to get help. And guess what? I did get help. I've been in recovery for months now, and I haven't purged once. No more secret bags, no more fruit fly breeding grounds, no more living in fear of tiny flying insects. Though, between us, I still get a little jumpy when I see flying bugs. But hey, recovery is a journey, right? Love, your friendly neighborhood. Former fruit fly landlord PS. If anyone's wondering, yes, we deep cleaned that closet. Like deep cleaned. And no, I definitely don't keep anything in there anymore without triple checking what it is first. Story 11. Let me tell you about the exact moment I realized I had made a terrible, horrible, no good decision. But first, we need to talk about kites. Here's what you need to know about kites. They require wind. This is not negotiable. This is kite science 101. But try telling that to 2 small children who have just discovered a forgotten kite in the depths of your closet, their eyes sparkling with the kind of hope that makes rational adults do completely irrational things. My 7-year-old and 4-year-old, hereby known as the determined one and the tiny dreamer, stood before me, clutching this artifact of outdoor entertainment like it held the secrets to eternal happiness. And maybe it did. Who am I to question the wisdom of children? Important fact, there was no wind. None. Zero. The air was as still as my grandmother's living room during mandatory quiet time. But have you ever tried saying no to 2 children who have just discovered the possibility of flight? It's like trying to explain to a cat why it shouldn't knock things off tables. Technically possible, but completely pointless. So there we were, doing what any normal family would do on a windless day, running up and down the street like we were training for some sort of bizarre Olympic event. The determined one had it figured out. Natural athlete, that one. Running fast enough to make the kite float behind them like some magical wind-powered dream. The tiny dreamer, however, was having what we in the parenting business call a moment. You know, the kind where the world is about to end because physics isn't cooperating with their heartfelt desires. This is where I had the idea. Note, when I say the idea, imagine it in the same tone you might use for phrases like the Titanic or the Hindenburg. It was brilliantly simple, really. I would pick up my small child, run very fast, and create magical kite success. Surely this would earn me the Best Parent Award. And you know what? It worked. Twice. The universe gave me just enough success to lull me into a false sense of security. This is called foreshadowing, dear readers. On our third attempt, I made the rookie mistake of looking behind us while running. The kite was doing this sad little dance across the pavement like a depressed butterfly trying to take flight. So naturally, I did what any sleep-deprived parent would do. I decided to run faster. Physics. Fun fact, a grown adult carrying the child while sprinting is basically a disaster waiting for its moment to shine. That moment came approximately 4 steps later. Time slowed down. You know how in movies they show those dramatic sequences in slow motion? This was exactly like that, except instead of looking graceful and heroic, I looked like a panicking giraffe who had suddenly forgotten how legs work. In that eternal moment, my thoughts went from oh no to this is going to hurt to protect the tiny human faster than you can say poor life choices. What followed was the most ungraceful pirouette in the history of emergency parental maneuvers. One hand on my daughter's head, one on her back. I spun like a malfunctioning ballerina having an existential crisis. When the dust settled, my daughter was perfectly fine, sitting in my lap like she'd just been on a slightly unusual carnival ride. My elbow, however, was split open. Turns out pavement is hard. Who knew? My shoulder had decided to take an impromptu vacation from its socket. And my rib? Well, that was a bonus surprise I discovered later. My dignity, needless to say, had left the chat. Now, because several people have asked, and because apparently this is something people want to know, yes, I did pop my own shoulder back in. This is not a cool party trick. This is not something you should try at home. This is something you do when your brain is floating in a soup of parental adrenaline and you're pretty sure you just saw your child's head bounce off the pavement. It didn't, but try telling that to your panic-addled parent brain. The whole shoulder relocation process was about as fun as it sounds. Picture this, sitting up while pretending everything is totally fine, gently relocating child from koala position, grabbing belt, this is important, using other hand on bleeding elbow because multitasking is a parent superpower, and then push, pull, pray, all while trying not to swear in front of the children. Recovery involved a carefully calibrated combination of ibuprofen, lots of it, brandy, just enough, and regret, infinite. And yes, I've had shoulder issues before. There's a staple in my left shoulder from a surgery when I was 18. This was my right shoulder's debut performance in the Leaving Its Assigned Position show. I guess it was feeling left out. That's a shoulder pun. I'm not sorry. The moral of this story? Sometimes being a parent means doing ridiculous things in the name of childhood joy. And sometimes those ridiculous things end with you explaining to your spouse why you need help putting on shirts for the next week. But hey, at least the kids had fun. Story 12. College friendships aren't like other friendships. They're built on bad choices and get stronger anyway. Take my best friend Marcus. That's not his real name, but this story is embarrassing enough without using his actual name. Marcus had a problem. Several problems, really. The biggest one? He'd convinced his new girlfriend he was a FedEx cargo pilot. Not just any pilot, a weekend cargo pilot with his own plane. I was the real airplane guy on campus. Back in Ohio, my dad owned an aircraft repair shop. Together, we'd restored a Cessna 182 Skylane that I kept at a small airstrip near campus. I'd often take friends flying, including Marcus. He'd been up with me enough times to learn the basics, or at least that's what I thought. His girlfriend, let's call her Emma, and Noel, believed every word of his story. Why wouldn't she? He'd borrowed my entire life story. Growing up around planes, getting his license at 16, restoring his own aircraft. He told it all so convincingly that sometimes I wondered if maybe he really did fly cargo planes when I wasn't looking. Then, Emma wanted to go flying with her pilot boyfriend. The phone call came on a Tuesday evening while I was studying for physics. "Please," Marcus said, his voice shaking. "You have to let me borrow your plane." "Are you crazy?" I nearly dropped my phone. "You've never even taken off by yourself. But she'll find out I've been lying if I can't fly her somewhere. Come on, help me out." That's how I ended up at the airstrip that evening, watching Marcus parade around in my captain's shirt. He wore those 4 stripes on the epaulettes like he'd earned them. As he performed the pre-flight check with fake confidence, Emma looked impressed. I tried not to roll my eyes. We told Emma that Marcus had been giving me flying lessons. That explained why I was tagging along on their date. The story worked fine until we got into the cockpit. The radio calls were his first mistake. He kept forgetting the tail number, stumbling over his words like he was giving his first speech in public speaking class. But the real show began during takeoff. In just 30 seconds, Marcus managed to kill the engine by pulling the wrong lever and almost drive off the runway, wait too long to pull up until I had to nudge him, and then, for his grand finale, attempt what looked like an accidental Blue Angels stunt barely 30 feet off the ground. I grabbed control before we could become tomorrow's headline news. After that, we flew in silence, hearing nothing but the steady engine sound and occasional static from the radio. When I landed the plane, with zero help from our cargo pilot, Emma sat completely still in the back seat. Nobody spoke during the drive back to campus. Finally, Emma broke the silence. "You're not really a FedEx pilot, are you?" They broke up a few days later. The story spread across campus faster than a viral tweet, and Marcus became known as FedEx, a nickname I might have helped stick. My dad couldn't decide whether to lecture me about aircraft safety or laugh until he cried whenever he told the story. But here's the thing about college. Even the most embarrassing moments can become legendary. Marcus learned to own his nickname. I heard he even used the story to charm other girls, though this time he was honest about being the world's worst fake cargo pilot. After graduation, Marcus and I lost touch. Sometimes I wonder if he ever got his pilot's license like he said he would. But part of me hopes he's still out there telling stories about his brief career as a FedEx pilot, this time with more truth and less altitude. Story 13. You know what's weird about airports? They're these strange in-between places. Not where you started, not where you're headed, just this weird middle space where your brain stops working right. Trust me, I learned this the hard way. Picture this, me standing in an airport convenience store, staring at what looked like the most amazing fruit and yogurt parfait ever. Now, most airport food looks like it's been sitting there since the Wright brothers first flew. But this stuff, it looked perfect. Too perfect. I bought it all. I ate it all. Future me would really, really wish I hadn't done that. Fast forward 2 hours. We're cruising at 35,000 feet when my stomach makes this noise. You know the kind. The one that means find a bathroom now. There's no negotiating with that kind of noise. Have you ever tried walking down an airplane aisle while your insides are doing the cha-cha? Every step feels like a million years. And then there's the airplane bathroom. Seriously, who designed these things? They're like time-traveling phone booths, minus the time travel, plus a toilet. What happened in that tiny bathroom? Let's just say it took 3 flushes. 3. And my underwear? Well, they didn't make it. R.I.P. Favourite pair of undies. There I was, trying to clean up with those scratchy paper towels and that weird blue soap that never seems quite soapy enough. But the worst part wasn't over. Oh no. When I opened that door, everyone knew. You know how people look at someone who just kicked a puppy? That's how they looked at me. For 2 more hours, I sat there, in my shame, well, you get the picture. So here's what I learned. When you're at an airport and that fresh fruit is calling your name, maybe don't answer, because some choices you make can't be unmade, and some consequences don't care that you're trapped in a metal tube miles above the earth with nowhere to hide. Turns out, dignity has a shelf life too, and sometimes it expires at 35,000 feet. Story 14. Fun fact, sleep pills have zero respect for your carefully made plans. Like, absolutely none. They're going to do their thing whether you're stuck in economy class or making the worst decision of your life. I should know. I was 19. Picture this, me basically a walking bundle of nerves with dark circles under my eyes, terrified of flying. My solution? My mum's Ambien. Super smart, right? The master plan was totally foolproof, or so I thought. First, board red-eye flight from California heading east. Then pop 1 pill. Next, sleep through 6 blissful hours of airplane white noise. Finally, wake up feeling amazing. I'd done this before. It always worked perfectly. Until it didn't. I sat there in seat 23B, staring at the ceiling panels, thinking, hey, maybe tonight's different. Maybe I don't even need the pill. The engines hummed their constant drone. Someone let out a phlegmy cough. The drink cart squeaked past, wheels protesting. Sleep? Nowhere to be found. So I did it. One tiny white pill, swallowed without water. Here's another fun fact. When your brain thinks, oh, it's only been 10 minutes, but surprise, it's actually been 3 hours, that pill becomes your worst enemy. The descent announcement crashed through my drug-induced haze like a hammer through glass. My stomach did a gymnastics routine. Then things got weird. The airplane walls, they started breathing. And apparently they were housing robots. Not cute wall E-types either. We're talking doom and gloom prophecy spouting machines. The air sickness bag materialized in my hands like some sort of messy magic trick. My poor seatmate's face is a blur in my memory, but I bet they set some kind of speed record getting off that plane. Can't blame them. I was alternating between dry heaving and announcing the end of the world. Everything after that comes in snippets, like a glitchy video game. I remember the terminal fluorescent lights spinning overhead. Then my phone screen showing your ride is here. Then me, decorating some unfortunate driver's car with whatever was left in my stomach. Those dorm stairs? Mount Everest had nothing on them. My room key was with my girlfriend, and I ended up needing public safety to rescue me from where I'd collapsed against my door like a sad puppet with cut strings. The officer asked if I was okay. I attempted a smile, then promptly threw up in my trash can. He made a strategic retreat without waiting for actual words. Smart guy. When I finally woke up, my head felt like it was hosting a rock concert. The clock read 4 p.m. and I'd learned my lesson about timing and sleep medication. Some people learn from watching others mess up. Others, like yours truly, have to become the warning story themselves. These days, I check the time about 5 times before taking any sleep aids on planes, because time gets weird when you're flying, and those pills, they really don't care about your schedule at all. Story 15. OMG, I need to tell you about the most mortifying thing that just happened to me at Amsterdam's Schiphol airport. Like, we're talking next level embarrassing. The kind of embarrassing that makes you want to crawl into a hole and never come out. So here's the deal. I was in Amsterdam with my friends for a birthday celebration. You know how Amsterdam is this super organized city with all these perfect canals, but also kind of wild? Like, they've got these special coffee shops, which BTW definitely aren't selling your regular pumpkin spice latte. Last night was epic, the kind of night that belongs in a coming-of-age movie montage, dancing, laughing, exploring the city like we owned it. Nobody knew us there, which made everything feel possible. You know that feeling? When you're young and everything feels infinite? But this morning, disaster. My alarm didn't go off. Okay, fine, maybe I forgot to set it. And suddenly we're all running around like headless chickens trying to pack. And here's where I made the mistake. Yes, capital T, capital M. I put on yesterday's jeans, the ones with that weird extra pocket in front. Cut to me at airport security watching my backpack disappear into the x-ray machine, when suddenly my brain goes, oh no, because I remembered what might still be in that stupid front pocket, a souvenir from one of those coffee shops that I definitely did not mean to bring to the airport. You know that feeling when your stomach drops to your toes? Yeah, multiply that by about 1 million. The security officer was like, empty your pockets, please. And I swear time started moving in slow motion. My heart was doing this weird gymnastics routine in my chest, and there it was, the thing I wasn't supposed to have, in its little plastic tube, right in front of everyone. I wanted to die right there, just spontaneously combust, poof, gone. But then the most amazing thing happened. This Dutch customs officer shows up, and instead of being all scary authority figure about it, he was actually nice. He was like, don't worry, you're the 20th person today. Can you believe it? He basically gave me the kids will be kids speech, had me sign some papers, and that was it. Now I'm sitting at the airport bar, drinking a legal beverage, thank you very much. And I can't help thinking about how sometimes the most embarrassing moments make the best stories. Like, this whole thing was absolutely mortifying, but it's also kind of hilarious. And the customs officer was so nice about it that it almost makes up for the fact that I nearly had a heart attack at age 20-something. I guess what I'm saying is that sometimes our most cringe-worthy moments end up being the ones we tell stories about later. And maybe that's exactly how it's supposed to be. PS note to self, always check your pockets before going to the airport. Like, seriously, all of them. And that's it for today's stories. If you enjoyed these regrettable recaps, you're going to love what I have planned for next time. Hit subscribe if you haven't already, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any future stories. Drop a comment letting me know which story was your favourite. Until next time, this is Rigatoni Jack signing off.